My name is Hazel Ashford, and 24 hours before my wedding, I discovered my fiancé Garrett had been sleeping with my mother Vivian. They had no idea I knew. They also had no idea that I was the one person in both families who knew everyone's most embarrassing secrets. What happened next destroyed two families and changed my life forever. If you've ever been betrayed by family, you'll understand what I did next. Like and subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories of family revenge that will make your jaw drop. New stories every day that will keep you on the edge of your seat. My story begins in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I've lived my entire 29 years. I work as a marketing manager for a growing tech startup downtown, a job that pays well enough for me to afford a nice apartment in the trendy Noda neighborhood and still save money for the future I was planning with the man I thought I'd spend my life with. I've always been what people call the responsible one. Even as a child, I was the peacekeeper in our family, the one who mediated arguments between my parents, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who organized family gatherings and made sure everyone felt included. This role became even more important 2 years ago when my parents went through what can only be described as a nuclear divorce. My mother, Vivian Ashford, is 55 years old, though she's been claiming to be 52 for the past 3 years. She's a petite woman with carefully maintained blonde hair and a wardrobe that costs more than most people's cars. She runs a small interior design business called Vivian's Visions, which sounds more successful than it actually is. After the divorce, she threw herself into maintaining her appearance and social status with an intensity that bordered on desperation. My father, Mitchell Ashford, is a corporate attorney with a prestigious Charlotte firm. At 55, he's the kind of man who wears expensive suits, drives a luxury sedan, and has never missed a day of work in his life. He's also someone who values reputation and appearances above almost everything else, which made the divorce proceedings particularly ugly when accusations started flying about infidelity and financial impropriety. Then there's my younger sister Paige, who's 26 and perpetually stuck in a state of extended adolescence. She moved back in with our mother after college and has been floating between part-time jobs and graduate school applications ever since. Paige has always been the artistic one, the free spirit who gets away with things that would never be tolerated from me. During the divorce, she firmly planted herself on our mother's side and refused to speak to our father for months. The divorce was brutal and public in the way that only wealthy family divorces can be. There were accusations of affairs, hidden assets, and emotional abuse flying from both sides. As their eldest daughter and the designated family mediator, I found myself in the impossible position of trying to maintain relationships with both parents while they systematically destroyed each other. This is where my unique position in the family ecosystem became both a blessing and a curse. Because both parents trusted me completely, they each confided details about the marriage and divorce that they would never share with anyone else. My mother told me about my father's workaholism, his emotional distance, and his failure to support her dreams. My father shared his frustrations with my mother's spending habits, her need for constant attention, and his growing resentment over what he saw as her selfishness. But it went deeper than just divorce drama. Over the months of proceedings, both parents began using me as their therapist, their confidant, and their spy. They shared family secrets going back decades, told me about relatives' problems and embarrassing situations, and gradually painted a picture of our extended family that was far more complicated and dysfunctional than I'd ever realized. My mother, in particular, seemed to have an encyclopedic knowledge of everyone's business. During our long phone calls and coffee dates, she would share gossip about cousins' failing marriages, uncles' business problems, and aunts' health scares. She knew which family members had money troubles, relationship issues, or secrets they were desperate to keep hidden. At the time, I thought she was just processing the trauma of her divorce by focusing on other people's problems. I had no idea she was giving me the ammunition I would eventually use to destroy her life. The divorce was finalized 18 months ago, with my father keeping the family home and most of the assets, while my mother received alimony and moved into a smaller, but still impressive condo in the upscale South Park area. The settlement seemed fair on paper, but it left my mother bitter and resentful, constantly complaining about having to start over at her age. That's when Garrett Mills entered our lives. I met Garrett at a charity fundraiser downtown, one of those networking events where Charlotte's young professionals gather to see and be seen while supposedly supporting good causes. He was 31, successful, and devastatingly charming in the way that real estate developers often are. He had the kind of confidence that comes from closing million-dollar deals and the social skills necessary to make everyone in a room feel like they're the most interesting person he's ever met. Our courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Garrett pursued me with an intensity that was both flattering and overwhelming. He sent flowers to my office, took me to expensive restaurants, and planned elaborate weekend getaways to mountain resorts and beach houses. Within 6 months, we were inseparable, and within a year, he'd proposed with a stunning 2-carat diamond ring at the top of Grandfather Mountain. What made Garrett seem perfect wasn't just his success or his looks, it was how effortlessly he fit into my complicated family situation. He was charming with my father, discussing business and golf with the easy confidence of someone who understood the world of high-stakes commerce. He was supportive and understanding with my mother, listening to her stories about the divorce and offering encouragement about her business ventures. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely care about healing the rifts in our family. He suggested family dinners that included both my parents, organized group outings where everyone could interact in neutral territory, and gradually became the bridge between my divorced parents that I had been trying to be for months. My mother, especially, seemed to bloom in Garrett's presence. For the first time since the divorce, she appeared happy and confident. She would dress up for family gatherings, laugh more freely, and seem to regain some of the vivacious energy that had been missing since her marriage ended. I was thrilled to see her returning to her old self and grateful to Garrett for helping her heal. Looking back now, I can see that what I interpreted as healing was actually something much more sinister. My mother wasn't blooming because she was getting over my father. She was blooming because she was falling for my fiancé. The signs were there, but I was too trusting and too busy planning our future to notice them. My mother started calling me more frequently, but the conversations increasingly centered around Garrett. She wanted to know about his work, his hobbies, his family background. She would ask detailed questions about our relationship that seemed intrusive, but which I dismissed as motherly concern. She also began finding excuses to spend time with Garrett alone. Her condo needed various repairs and improvements, and somehow Garrett always volunteered to help. He would go over on weekends when I was working or visiting friends, spending hours fixing leaky faucets, installing new light fixtures, or helping her rearrange furniture. Garrett is such a gem, she would tell me after these visits. You're so lucky to have found a man who's willing to help family. He's nothing like your father, who never lifted a finger around the house. I took these comments as compliments to my choice in men and evidence that my mother was finally accepting Garrett as part of our family. I had no idea she was systematically working to steal him away from me. Meanwhile, our wedding planning was progressing beautifully. We'd chosen St. Mark's Episcopal Church for the ceremony, a gorgeous stone building in the historic Myers Park neighborhood that had been the site of Charlotte's most elegant weddings for decades. The reception would be held at the Duke Mansion, a stunning early 20th century estate that had been converted into an exclusive event venue. I threw myself into the planning with the same organizational skills that made me successful at work. I researched vendors, compared prices, and coordinated schedules with the precision of a military operation. The guest list included 180 people from both families, plus friends and colleagues from our respective careers. The process brought both families together in ways that hadn't been possible since my parents' divorce. My mother and father were forced to cooperate on decisions about flowers, music, and seating arrangements. Garrett's parents, Harold and Patricia Mills, welcomed my fractured family with warmth and grace that made me believe we were all going to be one big, happy extended family. Harold Mills owned a successful construction company that specialized in high-end residential projects throughout the Charlotte area. He was a large, gregarious man who loved to tell stories about building some of the city's most impressive homes. Patricia was a former teacher turned full-time socialite who organized charity events and served on the boards of several local nonprofits. They had two other children besides Garrett, Derek, who was 28 and worked for his father's company, and Emma, who was 25 and worked as a marketing coordinator for a luxury car dealership. The Mills family appeared to be everything mine wasn't: stable, successful, and genuinely close to each other. Family dinners at the Mills house were revelations for someone who'd grown up with the constant tension and drama of my parents' marriage. Harold and Patricia actually seemed to like each other after 30 years of marriage. They finished each other's sentences, shared inside jokes, and treated their adult children with respect and affection rather than as pawns in some larger psychological game. It was during these family gatherings that I began to truly understand the scope of information I was accumulating about both families. Because I was accepted as Garrett's future wife, both families began treating me as an insider, sharing personal details and family secrets they would never tell outsiders. From the Mills family, I learned about Derek's struggles with gambling addiction, something that had been carefully hidden from most people, but which occasionally surfaced during family conversations. Derek had lost significant amounts of money at the casino and had been forced to borrow from his parents to cover debts. The family was managing the situation, but it was a source of constant stress and worry. I also learned about Emma's ongoing battle with depression and an eating disorder that she was hiding behind a carefully curated social media presence. Her Instagram account showed a young woman living her best life, but the reality was that she was struggling with mental health issues that required regular therapy and medication. Most significantly, I discovered that Harold's construction business was not as successful as it appeared. The family was months behind on their country club dues, had extended several car loans beyond their original terms, and was living largely on credit while maintaining the appearance of prosperity. They'd even asked Garrett for financial help on several occasions, something that was carefully hidden from their social circle. The Mills family's financial struggles weren't criminal or even particularly unusual, but they represented a significant gap between their public image and their private reality. They were desperate to maintain their social standing in Charlotte's competitive upper-middle-class community, even if it meant living beyond their means. Meanwhile, my own family was revealing secrets that were far more damaging and potentially explosive. During one of our regular coffee dates, my mother confided that the real reason for her divorce wasn't the incompatibility issues she'd publicly claimed. She'd had an affair with our neighbor, Tom Patterson, a married man who lived 3 houses down from our family home. The affair had lasted for over a year before my father discovered it, but he'd agreed to keep the details private during the divorce proceedings to protect our family's reputation. This revelation was shocking not just because of the betrayal it represented, but because of how it reframed everything I thought I knew about my parents' marriage. My mother had spent months portraying herself as the victim of an emotionally distant and workaholic husband, when in reality, she had been the one who destroyed the marriage through infidelity. But there were more secrets. My mother was in serious financial trouble, despite the generous divorce settlement she'd received. She'd racked up over $40,000 in credit card debt buying clothes, jewelry, and cosmetic treatments she couldn't afford. She was also lying about her age, not just on dating apps, but on business documents and even to some family members. Most shocking of all, she'd taken money from my college fund, money my father had been sending her to manage for my graduate school expenses, to pay for plastic surgery and other personal expenses. She'd stolen nearly $15,000 that was meant for my education and used it to fund her post-divorce lifestyle makeover. These revelations were devastating, but I kept them to myself out of loyalty to my mother. She was struggling with the transition to single life, and I believed she would eventually get her life back on track. I had no idea that she was already planning to steal the most important thing in my life. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in early October, the perfect time of year when Charlotte's oppressive summer heat would be broken, but the beautiful fall colors would still be at their peak. We'd planned a traditional ceremony followed by an elegant reception with dinner, dancing, and what I expected to be the most beautiful day of my life. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, both families were busy with final preparations. My mother was handling the flowers and decorations, Patricia Mills was coordinating with the caterer, and I was managing the dozens of last-minute details that seemed to multiply exponentially as a wedding approaches. It was during this time that I should have noticed the increased interactions between my mother and Garrett, but I was too busy and too trusting to pay attention. They were both helping with wedding preparations, so it seemed natural that they would need to communicate frequently about various details. What I didn't realize was that their communications had extended far beyond wedding planning into territory that should have been off-limits for a future mother-in-law and son-in-law. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were planned for the weekend before the wedding. Mine would be in Asheville, about 2 hours west of Charlotte in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. We'd rented a luxury cabin that could accommodate my 6 bridesmaids, and the plan was to spend Friday night through Sunday afternoon enjoying spa treatments, wine tastings, and the kind of female bonding that's supposed to prepare a bride for her new life as a married woman. Garrett's bachelor party was staying in Charlotte, with plans to play golf at one of the city's exclusive country clubs, followed by dinner at an upscale steakhouse and whatever additional festivities his groomsmen had planned. I trusted Garrett completely and wasn't worried about the typical bachelor party shenanigans that some brides stress about. Friday evening, my bridesmaids and I drove up to Asheville in a rented SUV, laughing and playing music and talking about the wedding that was now only a week away. The cabin was even more beautiful than the photos had suggested, with a stunning view of the mountains and amenities that made it feel more like a luxury resort than a rental property. We spent Friday evening and most of Saturday enjoying massages, facials, and the kind of pampering that's supposed to make a bride glow on her wedding day. But by Saturday afternoon, I was feeling increasingly anxious and nauseous. Whether it was pre-wedding nerves, something I'd eaten, or some kind of intuitive warning system, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My bridesmaids were supportive and understanding when I told them I needed to go home early. "It's just pre-wedding jitters," my maid of honor assured me. "Perfectly normal. Go home, get a good night's sleep, and you'll feel better tomorrow." I left Asheville around 6 o'clock Saturday evening, driving back towards Charlotte as the sun set behind the mountains. The drive gave me time to think about the wedding, about my future with Garrett, and about how lucky I was to have found someone who fit so perfectly into my complicated family situation. I arrived in Charlotte around 8:30 and decided to stop by my apartment to pick up some items I'd forgotten to pack for the bachelorette weekend. But as I was gathering my things, I remembered that I'd left my grandmother's pearl necklace at my mother's condo. I was planning to wear it as my something old for the wedding, and I wanted to make sure it was safely in my possession. My mother's condo was only 15 minutes from my apartment, and I still had keys from when I'd been helping her settle in after the divorce. I decided to swing by and pick up the necklace, then spend a quiet evening at home preparing for the week ahead. As I pulled into the parking garage of my mother's building, I noticed a BMW that looked exactly like Garrett's parked in one of the visitor spaces. My heart started racing, but I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Charlotte was full of BMWs, and it was probably just a coincidence. But as I rode the elevator up to my mother's floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The hallway was quiet, and I could hear music playing softly from inside her condo as I approached the door. I used my key to enter quietly, not wanting to startle my mother if she was entertaining friends or simply enjoying a quiet evening at home. The living room was dimly lit, with candles burning on the coffee table and wine glasses sitting on the side table. Classical music was playing from the stereo system, creating an atmosphere that seemed more romantic than maternal. And then I heard voices coming from upstairs. It was definitely my mother's voice, but there was someone with her. Someone whose voice I recognized with a sick certainty that made my knees weak and my hands shake. It was Garrett. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, listening to a conversation that shattered everything I thought I knew about the two people I trusted most in the world. They weren't just talking. They were intimate, comfortable, and completely unaware that their world was about to explode. "She has no idea," my mother was saying, her voice soft, but carrying clearly down the stairs. Sweet, naive Hazel. She thinks she's so smart, organizing everyone's life, but she can't see what's right in front of her. "She's going to make someone a good wife someday," Garrett replied, and I could hear the cruel amusement in his voice. Just not me. This is so much better than settling for her boring predictability. They laughed together, a sound that felt like a physical blow to my chest. The casual cruelty in their voices was almost worse than the betrayal itself. They weren't just having an affair, they were mocking me, dismissing me, treating me like I was some pathetic obstacle to their happiness. "When did you know?" my mother asked. "When did you realize you wanted me instead of her?" "Honestly? Almost from the beginning," Garrett said. She introduced me to this beautiful, sophisticated woman who actually understood what a man needs. "Hazel is sweet, but you're intoxicating." I listened to more of their conversation, my phone recording every word as evidence of their betrayal. They talked about how long the affair had been going on, nearly 6 months, starting around the time we'd begun serious wedding planning. They discussed their plans for after the wedding, how they would continue seeing each other while I remained oblivious to their deception. Most devastating of all, they talked about me with a mixture of pity and contempt that made it clear this wasn't just about physical attraction. They genuinely believed I was naive, boring, and unworthy of the life I'd worked so hard to build. "The wedding is going to be beautiful," my mother said. "Too bad the bride doesn't deserve the groom." "Don't worry," Garrett replied. "After we're married, I'll make sure you get plenty of attention. She'll be so busy playing house that she'll never notice how often I need to work late or travel for business." By the time I crept back out of the condo, I had nearly 20 minutes of recorded conversation that documented not just their affair, but their complete lack of respect for me as a person. The betrayal was devastating enough, but the casual cruelty of their words cut deeper than I could have imagined. I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, crying until I couldn't breathe and trying to process what I'd just learned. The man I was supposed to marry in 1 week had been sleeping with my mother for months. The mother who was supposed to support and protect me had been actively working to steal my fiancé while helping me plan our wedding. But as the shock began to wear off, it was replaced by something else: cold, calculating anger. I drove home slowly, my mind racing with possibilities. I could confront them privately, demand explanations, and try to salvage something from the wreckage of my life. I could call off the wedding quietly and try to move on with my dignity intact. I could expose them publicly and let the social consequences speak for themselves. Or I could use the one advantage I had over both of them: I knew where all the bodies were buried in both families. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I was going to be the author of their destruction. Sunday morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day systematically reviewing everything I knew about both families. I went through years of text messages, emails, and mental notes about family secrets I'd been trusted with over the months and years of being everyone's confidant. The picture that emerged was devastating for both families, and I realized I had enough ammunition to destroy not just my mother and Garrett, but their entire social and professional standing in Charlotte. My mother's secrets were numerous and damaging. Beyond the affair with Tom Patterson that had caused her divorce, she'd been systematically lying about multiple aspects of her life. She was drowning in debt despite receiving substantial alimony from my father. She'd taken money from my college fund, nearly $15,000, to pay for plastic surgery and luxury items she couldn't afford. She was also lying about her age by 3 years, not just on dating apps, but on business documents and insurance forms. This wasn't just vanity, it was potentially fraud, especially since she'd claimed a younger age to qualify for certain business insurance rates. Most damaging from a social perspective, she'd been spreading gossip and lies about various family members and neighbors during her divorce proceedings. She'd told mutual friends that my father had been abusive, that he'd hidden assets during the divorce, and that he'd threatened her. None of this was true, but it had damaged his reputation in their social circle. But the Mills family had just as many secrets, and their carefully maintained image of success and stability was built on a foundation of lies and financial mismanagement. Harold's construction business was months away from bankruptcy. They'd taken on several large projects that had gone over budget and behind schedule, leaving them liable for significant cost overruns. They owed money to suppliers, subcontractors, and even some clients who'd paid deposits for work that couldn't be completed. The family was months behind on their country club dues, but were continuing to attend events and use the facilities. They'd refinanced their home twice and were now underwater on the mortgage. Both Harold and Patricia were carrying substantial credit card debt, and they'd been borrowing money from Garrett to keep up appearances. Derek's gambling addiction was worse than the family had admitted to themselves. He'd lost over $30,000 in the past year and had taken out secret credit cards that his wife Michelle didn't know about. He was also borrowing money from the business, creating additional financial strain on an already struggling company. Emma's mental health issues were being hidden behind a carefully curated social media presence, but the reality was that she'd been hospitalized twice for her eating disorder and was taking medications that she'd been hiding from most of the family. Most importantly, Patricia's book club was actually a weekly gossip session where she spread rumors and information about neighbors, friends, and even family members. I'd heard her say horrible things about people she smiled at in public, including calling my mother desperate and pathetic, while pretending to welcome her into their family. All of these secrets had been shared with me in confidence over months of family dinners, private conversations, and the kind of trust building that happens when someone is about to become family. Under normal circumstances, I would have taken these secrets to my grave. But these weren't normal circumstances. I spent Sunday evening creating a detailed plan for systematic destruction of both families' reputations and social standing. The beauty of my plan was that it would unfold gradually, with each revelation building on the last. By the time the wedding day arrived, both families would be dealing with so much chaos and drama that my final revelation would be the devastating climax to a week of social destruction. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and began implementing my plan. My first target was Derek's wife, Michelle, who had been kept in the dark about her husband's gambling addiction and the extent of their financial problems. I called her with concerns about Derek's behavior that I'd observed during recent family gatherings. "Michelle, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I've been worried about Derek," I said, using the caring tone that had made me everyone's trusted confidant. At the last family dinner, I overheard him and Garrett talking about some kind of financial stress, and I thought you should know. Michelle was immediately concerned. "What kind of financial stress?" "Derek hasn't mentioned anything to me." "I don't want to overstep boundaries," I said carefully, but they were discussing debts and borrowing money from Harold's business. "I'm probably wrong, but you might want to check your credit reports, just to be safe." I framed my concern as that of a caring future sister-in-law who was worried about family harmony. Michelle thanked me for calling and promised to look into the situation. My next call was to the Charlotte Country Club's membership committee. Using an anonymous email account I'd created, I sent detailed information about the Mills family's unpaid dues, including specific amounts and dates that I'd learned during family conversations. The email was professional and factual, presenting the information as a concern from a member who'd noticed irregularities in the family's account status. I included enough specific details to make the claims credible while maintaining my anonymity. Tuesday morning, I reached out to my father with information about my mother's financial situation and the missing college fund money. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something serious," I said during our phone call. "I've discovered some concerning things about Mom's finances, and I think you need to know about them." I told him about finding credit card statements during wedding planning visits to my mother's condo, about her comments regarding money troubles, and most importantly, about the missing college fund money that he'd been sending her to manage on my behalf. My father was immediately alarmed. "How much money are we talking about, Hazel?" "I think it might be $15,000 or more," I said. I haven't wanted to confront her about it directly, but I found some bank statements that show large cash withdrawals around the same time you were sending the college fund payments. I suggested he might want to hire a forensic accountant to review the situation, framing it as protecting both of our interests rather than as an attack on my mother. Tuesday afternoon, I made strategic calls to several extended family members on both sides, carefully planting seeds of concern about the upcoming wedding. I called my mother's sister Janet with worries about my mother's emotional stability and her inappropriate behavior with men since the divorce. I called Garrett's Aunt Carol with concerns about my mother's financial situation and her potential impact on Garrett's future. Each conversation was carefully calibrated to sound like the worried concerns of a responsible daughter and future daughter-in-law, while actually planting devastating information that would spread through family gossip networks like wildfire. Wednesday was when I deployed the nuclear option. I created an anonymous social media account and uploaded the audio recording I'd made of Garrett and my mother's conversation. I didn't include the explicit sexual content. That would have been gratuitous and potentially illegal. Instead, I focused on the portions where they discussed their affair, mocked me as naive and boring, and planned to continue their relationship after my wedding. The audio was devastating because it was undeniably their voices saying things that couldn't be explained away or denied. I tagged several mutual friends and family members in the post, ensuring it would spread quickly through our interconnected social circles. Within hours, the recording was being shared throughout Charlotte's social media networks. My phone started buzzing with calls and texts from confused and concerned friends and family members, but I was safely ensconced in a mountain cabin 3 hours away, letting the chaos unfold without me. I'd rented the cabin for the entire week, telling everyone I needed some pre-wedding quiet time to center myself and prepare for the big day. The property was remote enough that cell phone service was spotty, giving me the perfect excuse for being unavailable during the social media firestorm I'd created. From my mountain hideaway, I monitored the situation through the cabin's satellite internet connection. The audio recording had gone viral within our community, generating hundreds of comments, shares, and reactions. Both families were in full crisis mode, trying to control the damage while having no idea where the recording had come from or how much more information might be released. Thursday morning brought the first wave of real-world consequences. Michelle had taken my advice about checking credit reports and discovered the full extent of Derek's gambling debts and secret credit cards. She'd confronted him Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning, she was calling divorce attorneys and moving out of their shared apartment. The country club had contacted Harold about the family's unpaid dues, demanding immediate payment or suspension of their membership privileges. Harold was scrambling to find the money while trying to maintain the appearance that everything was fine. My father had hired a forensic accountant to review my mother's handling of the college fund money, and preliminary findings suggested that significant amounts had been diverted for personal use rather than educational expenses. Most importantly, both families were dealing with the social fallout from the audio recording. Friends, neighbors, and business associates were all buzzing with gossip about the affair and what it meant for the upcoming wedding. Friday afternoon, I received dozens of calls and text messages from both families, demanding to know where I was and what I knew about the audio recording. I responded with brief messages saying I was taking some quiet time before the wedding and would see everyone at the ceremony on Saturday. Saturday morning, my wedding day, I put on a beautiful white dress and drove back to Charlotte. Not to get married, but to finish what I'd started. I arrived at St. Mark's Episcopal Church at exactly the time the ceremony was supposed to begin. The parking lot was full, indicating that most guests had decided to attend despite the week's drama. I could only imagine the conversations happening inside the church as people tried to make sense of everything that had unfolded. As I walked toward the church entrance, I could see the tension and chaos that had consumed both families. People were gathered in small groups, whispering urgently and constantly checking their phones. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and dread. Garrett stood at the altar looking pale and stressed, constantly scanning the congregation as if expecting someone to stand up and object to the proceedings. My mother sat in the front row wearing a stunning blue dress that had probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked beautiful but tense, her carefully applied makeup not quite hiding the strain around her eyes. Harold and Patricia Mills sat across the aisle, their faces carefully composed, but their body language suggesting barely controlled panic. Derek was noticeably absent, presumably dealing with his crumbling marriage, while Emma sat between her parents looking like she wanted to disappear entirely. The church was filled with 180 guests who had come expecting a beautiful wedding, but who were now witnesses to what would become the most talked about social disaster in Charlotte's recent memory. Pastor Williams began the ceremony with the traditional opening words, his voice steady despite the obvious tension in the congregation. The processional music played, and my bridesmaids walked down the aisle looking beautiful, but confused about what was really happening. When it was time for me to walk down the aisle, I moved slowly and deliberately, making eye contact with key family members and friends as I passed. I could see the confusion on people's faces as they tried to reconcile the beautiful bride they were seeing with the devastating audio recording they'd heard just days before. The ceremony proceeded normally through the opening prayers and readings. Pastor Williams delivered a homily about love, trust, and commitment that felt increasingly surreal given what I knew about the groom and what many guests suspected about the situation. Finally, we reached the moment I'd been waiting for. If any person can show just cause why Hazel and Garrett may not be joined together in holy matrimony, Pastor Williams announced, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. I stepped forward and reached for the microphone. Actually, Pastor Williams, I said, my voice clear and steady despite my racing heart, I have something to say. The church fell completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in the suddenly airless space. I looked directly at Garrett, then at my mother, then at the congregation filled with people who had just lived through a week of family drama and social media chaos. Many of you heard an audio recording this week of my fiancé and my mother betraying me in the most intimate way possible, I began. What you heard was real, recorded just last Saturday night when I discovered them together at my mother's condo. Gasps and whispers rippled through the congregation. Some people pulled out their phones, either to record what was happening or to verify the details I was sharing. But that recording only scratches the surface of the deception and lies that have been poisoning both of our families for months and years. I turned to face my mother directly. Vivian, you've spent 2 years playing the victim of a failed marriage, letting Dad take the blame for your divorce while hiding the truth from everyone who matters. But everyone here should know that the real reason for your divorce was your affair with our married neighbor, Tom Patterson. Dad never told anyone because he was trying to protect our family's reputation, but you've been lying about it ever since. My mother's face went white. The color drained so quickly I thought she might faint right there in the front pew. You've also been lying about your age for years. You're actually 55, not 52 as you've been telling everyone, including business partners and insurance companies. And the money Dad has been sending you to manage my college fund? You've stolen nearly $15,000 of it to pay for plastic surgery and shopping sprees while pretending to be a responsible mother managing her daughter's educational future. The congregation erupted in whispers and shocked expressions. I could see people turning to stare at my mother, who was now openly crying but still trying to maintain some shred of dignity. But the lies and deception aren't limited to my family, I continued, turning toward the Mills family section. Harold, your construction business isn't the success story you've been pretending it is. You're months away from bankruptcy, owing money to suppliers and contractors throughout Charlotte. You've been borrowing money from Garrett to pay basic expenses while maintaining the illusion of prosperity. Harold started to stand as if to protest, but Patricia pulled him back down. Patricia, your weekly book club friends might be interested to know what you really do during those gatherings, gossiping about neighbors and friends, including calling my mother desperate and pathetic behind her back while pretending to welcome her into your family. Patricia looked like she wanted to crawl under the pew and disappear. Derek, your wife Michelle deserves to know about your gambling addiction and the $30,000 you've lost at the casino this year. She also deserves to know about the secret credit cards you've been hiding from her and the money you've been stealing from your father's business to cover your debts. At this point, the church was in complete chaos. People were shouting questions, demanding explanations, and pointing fingers at each other. Several family members had stood up and were arguing loudly with their neighbors. Emma, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, I hope you get the help you need for your eating disorder and depression, but hiding behind Instagram lies isn't helping you or anyone else who's struggling with similar issues. I set the microphone back on its stand and looked out at the congregation of people whose dirty laundry I'd just aired in the most public way possible. This wedding is off, I announced clearly. Not just because my fiancé betrayed me with my mother, but because I refuse to join my life to people who have such little respect for truth, loyalty, or basic human decency. I gathered my wedding dress train and walked back up the aisle, my head held high, leaving behind a church full of people whose world I'd just systematically destroyed. As I reached the church doors, I could hear the chaos continuing to erupt behind me. Shouting, accusations, people demanding answers to questions they'd never thought to ask before. The sound of relationships imploding and family bonds snapping under the weight of revealed truth. I got in my car and drove away, feeling a mixture of devastation and liberation that I'd never experienced before. The immediate aftermath was swift and merciless for both families. Within 24 hours, the story had spread throughout Charlotte's interconnected social circles. The combination of the audio recording, my wedding day revelations, and the specific details I'd shared created a perfect storm of gossip and scandal that neither family could escape. My mother's interior design business began hemorrhaging clients immediately. Word spread quickly through the community about her lies, her financial problems, and her affair with a married man. 3 of her biggest clients canceled their contracts within the first week, citing concerns about trustworthiness and professionalism. The social consequences were even more devastating. Invitations to parties, charity events, and community functions dried up almost overnight. My mother found herself excluded from the social circles she'd worked years to join, becoming a pariah in a city where reputation determines everything. Garrett's real estate business suffered similar damage. Several clients who'd heard about the wedding day disaster decided they didn't want to work with someone involved in such a public scandal. His reputation for being trustworthy and family-oriented was completely destroyed, and his income dropped by more than half within the first month. The Mills family faced their own reckoning. The country club revoked their membership for non-payment of dues, which created additional embarrassment when they had to cancel several social events they'd planned to host there. Harold's construction business was forced into bankruptcy when suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding debts. Derek's marriage ended in divorce when Michelle discovered the full extent of his gambling debts and financial deception. The couple was forced to sell their home and split their remaining assets, with Derek moving back in with his parents while Michelle relocated to another city to start over. But the damage went deeper than just immediate consequences. Both families found themselves at the center of ongoing legal battles and financial investigations. My father's forensic accountant confirmed that my mother had indeed stolen money from my college fund. When confronted with the evidence, she initially denied it, then tried to claim it was a loan that she'd intended to repay. My father immediately filed a civil lawsuit to recover the funds, which became public record and further damaged her reputation. The investigation into my mother's finances also revealed other irregularities, including potentially fraudulent insurance claims where she'd misrepresented her age and income. While these weren't criminal charges, they resulted in policy cancellations and demands for repayment that pushed her closer to bankruptcy. Harold's business bankruptcy triggered additional investigations into his company's practices. Several clients came forward with complaints about unfinished work and poor quality construction, leading to a series of civil lawsuits that would drag on for years. 3 months after the wedding day disaster, both families had been so thoroughly destroyed that they were essentially starting over from scratch. But for me, the immediate aftermath had been surprisingly liberating. I took a month off from work to process everything that had happened and to deal with the media attention that my story had generated. The wedding day revelation had been filmed by several guests, and within days, the video was circulating on social media with millions of views. Several news outlets contacted me for interviews about the Charlotte wedding revenge story, but I declined most requests. I did speak with one reporter from the Charlotte Observer who had covered business stories about my company in the past, keeping my comments brief and dignified. "I believe in the truth," I told the reporter. "And I believe that people have the right to know who they're really dealing with, especially when it comes to matters of trust and family loyalty." A month after the disaster, I received an unexpected job offer from a marketing firm in Denver, Colorado. The position was a significant promotion with a substantial salary increase, and the timing felt perfect for a fresh start away from the ongoing drama in Charlotte. Before I left North Carolina, I had several difficult but necessary conversations with family members on both sides. My father had been my strongest supporter throughout the entire ordeal. Once he learned the truth about my mother's affair and financial deception, he was horrified by how I'd been betrayed and proud of how I'd handled the situation. "I'm sorry you had to find out about your mother's character this way," he told me during one of our dinners together. "I should have been more honest about what happened during our marriage, but I was trying to protect you and Paige." He'd successfully recovered most of my college fund money through the lawsuit and insisted on giving it to me immediately to help with my move to Denver. "Use this for your new life," he said. "You've more than earned it." My relationship with my sister Paige had been more complicated. Initially, she'd been furious with me for destroying our mother and humiliating our family. But as more truth came to light about our mother's behavior and lies, Paige began to see the situation differently. "I'm starting to realize that I never really knew Mom at all," she admitted during a long phone conversation. "All these years, I thought she was this victim who'd been wronged by Dad, but she was actually the problem the whole time." Paige eventually moved out of our mother's condo and into her own apartment. She was working on rebuilding her relationship with our father and had started therapy to process the family dysfunction she was only now beginning to recognize. 3 months after the wedding incident, my mother and Garrett made one final, desperate attempt to contact me. They showed up at my apartment together, which should have told me everything I needed to know about the sincerity of their apology, demanding that I meet with them to work things out. "Hazel, honey, what you did was completely disproportionate to our mistake," my mother said, looking older and more worn down than I'd ever seen her. "We hurt you and we're sorry, but you destroyed our entire lives." "Your mistake," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "You had a months-long affair with my fiancé. You planned to let me marry him while you continued sleeping with him. You mocked me behind my back and stole money from my education fund. That's not a mistake, that's a pattern of calculated betrayal." Garrett tried a different approach, appealing to my sense of fairness and family loyalty. "Look, what we did was wrong, but what you did was vindictive and cruel. You didn't just hurt us, you destroyed innocent people in both families." I looked at him with disgust. Innocent people? Like Derek's wife, who deserved to know about his gambling addiction and secret debts. Like my father, who deserved to know that his ex-wife had stolen his daughter's college fund. Like Emma, who needs real help for her eating disorder instead of Instagram fantasies. "You had no right to air everyone's private business in public," my mother protested. "And you had no right to betray your daughter with her fiancé," I shot back. "At least everything I revealed was true. Can you say the same about the lies you've been living?" The conversation continued in circles for nearly 2 hours, with both of them trying different tactics to make me feel guilty for defending myself. They accused me of being vindictive, cruel, and disproportionate in my response. They claimed that families should stick together and work through problems privately. Finally, I'd heard enough. "Let me be very clear about something," I said, standing up to signal that the conversation was ending. "I spent my entire adult life being the family mediator, keeping everyone's secrets, smoothing over problems, and making excuses for bad behavior. I was the reliable one, the trustworthy one, the one who put family loyalty above everything else." I looked directly at my mother. "And you repaid that loyalty by sleeping with my fiancé while helping me plan our wedding. You mocked me as naive and boring while stealing money from my education fund." Then I turned to Garrett. "And you took advantage of my trust to have an affair with my mother while planning to marry me and continue deceiving me for the rest of our lives. Both of you made deliberate choices to betray me in the worst possible ways. I simply made sure that everyone else knew the truth about who you really are. If that destroyed your lives, it's because your lives were built on lies, deception, and the assumption that you could take advantage of people who trusted you." I walked to the door and opened it. "If you want any possibility of forgiveness from me, you'll need to start by taking full responsibility for your actions instead of blaming me for the consequences. Until then, we have nothing to discuss." They left, and I never heard from either of them again directly. 1 year after the wedding that never was, I was thriving in my new life in Denver. The city offered everything Charlotte couldn't: a fresh start, professional opportunities, and a community where no one knew about my family's drama. I'd been promoted twice at my new company, had made genuine friends who valued honesty and integrity, and was even beginning to date again. I'd learned to be cautious about trust, but I hadn't let the betrayal make me cynical about the possibility of finding real love with someone who shared my values. Through my father, I occasionally heard updates about the ongoing aftermath in Charlotte. My mother had been forced to declare bankruptcy and move into a small apartment in a less desirable part of the city. She'd lost most of her social connections and was working part-time for another interior designer, essentially starting over in her mid-50s. Garrett had moved to another city after his real estate business failed. The affair between him and my mother had ended badly within weeks of the wedding day disaster, apparently unable to survive the scrutiny and consequences of their choices. Derek had managed to overcome his gambling addiction with professional help and was slowly rebuilding his life, though his marriage hadn't survived the revelations about his deception. Emma was getting proper treatment for her eating disorder and had started a blog about mental health that was actually helping other people struggling with similar issues. Harold and Patricia had been forced to downsize significantly, selling their large home and moving into a smaller place while Harold worked to rebuild his construction business under a new name. The family was slowly healing, but their social standing in Charlotte had never recovered. Most importantly, my relationship with my father had become stronger than it had ever been. We talked regularly, and he'd even visited me in Denver several times. He was dating again, a kind, intelligent woman who appreciated his integrity and treated him with the respect he deserved. "I'm proud of you," he told me during his last visit. "What you did took incredible courage. Not everyone would have had the strength to stand up for themselves the way you did." "I don't always feel proud of it," I admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, if I could have handled it differently." "You exposed the truth," he said firmly. "The people who got hurt were hurt by their own actions and choices, not by your revelation of those actions. You just made sure everyone could see the situation clearly instead of being deceived by carefully maintained lies." Looking back now, 2 years after the events that changed my life, I can honestly say I don't regret what I did. Yes, it was dramatic. Yes, it hurt people beyond just the ones who had betrayed me directly. But sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to stop enabling destructive behavior and force people to face the consequences of their choices. My mother and Garrett thought they could betray me and get away with it because I was naive and predictable. They learned the hard way that trustworthy people aren't necessarily pushovers, and that betraying someone's trust can have consequences they never imagined. The wedding day revelation wasn't really about revenge, although I understand why people see it that way. It was about finally refusing to protect people who had shown me they didn't deserve my protection. It was about standing up for myself when no one else would, and it was about using the truth as a weapon against people who had been using lies to hurt me. For years, I had been the family secret keeper, the one who smoothed over problems and maintained the peace at any cost. I had taught my family that they could take me for granted, share their secrets with me, and expect me to keep their lies safe no matter how much it cost me personally. The most important lesson I learned is that you teach people how to treat you through what you're willing to accept. I had spent years accepting treatment that I didn't deserve because I believed that family loyalty meant protecting people even when they were hurting me. What I discovered is that real family loyalty goes both ways. The people who truly love you won't put you in positions where you have to choose between your integrity and their comfort. They won't ask you to keep secrets that require you to lie to other people you care about. And they certainly won't betray your trust while expecting you to protect theirs. The truth is the most powerful weapon any of us have, but most of us are too afraid to use it. We protect people's lies, enable their bad behavior, and sacrifice our own well-being to maintain relationships that aren't actually serving us. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to stop protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. Sometimes the most loving response to betrayal is to make sure it can't happen again, not just to you, but to the next person who might trust them. My wedding day revelation destroyed 2 families' carefully maintained facades, but it also freed everyone from living lies that were slowly poisoning all of our relationships. Derek got help for his gambling addiction. Emma got proper treatment for her eating disorder. My father learned the truth about his marriage and was able to move forward with a clear understanding of what had really happened. Most importantly, I learned that I deserved better than being taken for granted by people who claimed to love me. I learned that protecting myself sometimes requires disappointing other people, and that's not something I need to feel guilty about. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: you don't owe your loyalty to people who have proven they don't value it. You don't have to keep secrets that require you to compromise your integrity. And you don't have to accept betrayal quietly just because it comes from family members. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is simply telling the truth about what's really happening in your life. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop protecting people who are hurting you. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to make sure that lies can't continue to poison relationships that might otherwise have a chance to heal. The truth will set you free, but first it might destroy everything that was built on lies. That's not your fault. That's just the natural consequence of choosing reality over comfortable deceptions. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone's lies and protecting your own well-being? What did you do, and how did it change your relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories about family dynamics, personal boundaries, and the courage it takes to demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, the people who truly love you will never ask you to betray yourself to protect them. If they do, they're not the ones whose opinions should matter to you. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. Make sure you're someone you can respect, even if it means disappointing people who have taken your loyalty for granted. You deserve better than being anyone's secret keeper, especially when those secrets are being used to hurt you. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to tell the truth, especially when, other people don't want to hear it.